Talking About Horses, bringing you closer to some of the best horsemen in the world for tips, insights, and stories. Listen at home, at work, in the car, or in the saddle. This is Talking About Horses. Here's your host, Patrick King.
Hey there, gang. Patrick King here, and I want to thank you for tuning in for episode number 27 of Talking About Horses. Today I'm pleased to be joined by one of America's most respected horse trainers, Charles Wilhelm. His extensive experience spans 40 years of training in dressage, working cow horse, reining, western pleasure, and trail. He's known for his superb skills in communicating and motivating people, as well as his natural abilities with the horse. Charles is one of the few trainers specializing in reschooling horses with problems. He also offers performance training, including western pleasure, cowboy dressage, and ranch versatility. Charles, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, awesome. It's great to have you on the show. We were chatting a little bit before we went live here that you and I have never gotten the opportunity yet to meet. And I know you said you've been kind of on the circuit, and I know I've been on the circuit for a number of years now. So it's great to be able to connect in this way, even though we've not yet met.
Well, it's better than nothing, It's making that connection and meeting people in our same industry as you are it's always a good thing, I love sharing ideas with other people, and you know what? We don't have to always agree by what everyone does or doesn't do, you know what I mean? So,
absolutely.
But it's good to connect.
Yes, absolutely. No, and I appreciate it very much. So for anybody in our audience out here that doesn't really know you or maybe hasn't heard of you, can you give us a little bit your history with horses?
Well, I think I'm kind of like a few other trainers around, all started out with a passion with horses. My first introduction was with actually it was more of a cowman more than do with horses. And he had horses, don't get me wrong. And he started his own horses. In fact, he was starting his own horses at 74. His son was big into the horse industry, but I think where I learned my work ethic was with his father, Clarence Chown. Senior, and so we're always fixing fences, and you're up early in the morning and you work all day, and then I was introduced to his son. He came down from Northern California, and that's where I got involved in horses with him. I was with a single mother, and he actually would act as a guardian for me. I didn't have a father at the time, and that's where I actually was introduced to the Lord and accepted the Lord as a teenager. And so that's kind of where it all started, and thank God the Lord had his hand on me and guided me to the right people, because with those two people, which is a big part of my life, and Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, which part of my heroes.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here today.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's awesome. So that was Clarence Chown, you said?
Chown. C-H-O-W-N.
Okay.
Clarence Chown.
Okay.
And that was senior, and then he had a son, Clarence Chown Jr.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And he's got some sons doing quite well in the equitation or roping world, and part of the horse industry as well. And Tommy Chown, he's Western Pleasure.
Okay.
Anybody out there is familiar with the pleasure world? He's been quite successful.
Gotcha.
And yep. So they all been doing good, and here again, those are all good memories. And of course, then you go into adulthood, and you get a family, and then pretty soon through life, you get to be 72 and kick back and relax a little bit and still enjoy horses.
There you go. Good. So you started with Mr. Chown as a teenager.
Yes.
What got you starting into horses as a profession? How did that come about?
Well, we always had horses, and I was involved in horses, went to a lot of shows, and was in the show world for a while. And then, I had to go get a real job because you was always told you can't make a living in the horse industry.
Right.
You know, of course, this goes back 60-some years, and I got married and had a daughter and had to go out and make some money. So I had to go out and get a real job. But always stayed in touch with the horses, always had horses throughout my years. Until about 30 years ago, I decided to go professionally. Had horse property, and that's kind of where it was. But what motivated me was I had open heart surgery, and I decided that I'd be awfully upset if I died and didn't do what I really like to do, and that's with working with horses full time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What was your job, or were your jobs before horses?
Well, I was quite successful in the real estate. I had an automotive business that was quite successful. My wife was interior designer.
Oh, okay.
Was in probably 15, 16 magazines like I'm trying to think here, garden magazines,
Okay.
interior designs. Excuse me. And so as I got busier, she left her job and supported me. Of course, then we hit the road and back one of the very few. There was only a few people at the time that were on the road. That was Pat Pirelli, John Lyons, Richard Schrake, and Lynn Palm. And I have to say, with Lynn Palm, it kind of is what kind of got me in touch with, because her background is that she likes to use the philosophy of dressage, and so I got a little taste of that, and I got to know her quite well. We never did anything together, but we got to know each other. And so when dressage trainer from Australia, my brain just went south. Major Miguel Tavora, which was underling of Una Rivera, I was told I should ride with him because we had a lot in common. And I said, well, I don't think so, because in the Bay Area, which is probably mostly hunter jumpers, stadium jumping, dressage, eventing, kind of like here in Aiken. And so anyway, I decided, okay, I'll go ahead and I'll ride with him. And I did, and he came to my place, and what I was impressed with, not only with him, but his apprentice, I guess you would say, he was from New York. And Major McGill, he was from the Portuguese Army, and that's how he got the major. But, he'd get on these paint horses of mine and make them look like different kind of frame altogether. And at that point in time, I was pretty good colt start. I mean, I was getting on colts probably before I could even hardly lead the darn things. I kind of push him in, drag him in, run him into the round pen, in about an hour and a half, I'm on him,
Right.
And the interesting thing about that, I was on him, but, sometimes you felt like he was on a cake of dynamite, So, so anyway, I was impressed with him, and I had a chance to work with John Lyons a little bit, and his was always on the, pressure release. And, the horse just gives you something, you release on that. And so Major McGarrett was kind of in that direction, but totally different equitation. And I was always thought I was a pretty good rider. You know, I'm used to riding fence lines, dragging calves, and, you know, whatever, and getting on a bunch of colts. But I realized then I didn't know nothing about riding.
Yeah.
Equitation.
Mm-hmm.
So he came over, you know, and he still comes over. I saw him just before I left, and I haven't ridden with him for years. But he, you know, he'd be over 3 or 4 times a year, and doing clinics, and I'd ride with him. You know, he'd be here, you know, 3 weeks to 6 weeks, and I'd ride with him almost every day. And I learned a lot, you know, and we got to talking, and I don't know if any of the audience or yourself, he says you remind me of Bouchard.
Oh, okay.
And Bouchard was really on to the release, you know, ask and the horse gives you release.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know who the heck that was, but later on, you know, I found a book on him.
Right.
And I read it, and it's not one of those books back in those days you pick up and you go through it. I mean, I'd have to literally read a page 2 or 3 times.
Right.
And go off and have to think about it, you know, because it just warped my mind, you know.
Yes. They were written like college manuals.
Yeah, exactly, you know, but anyway, and I share that book with people, but anyway, that person really brought me around to, you know, what equitation was all about, what riding is all about. And then, you know, then I ended up buying a place on the East Bay. I was in the West Bay, and we bought a facility. It was a hunter jumper barn, and they wanted a smaller place because he wanted to start training for the Olympics. And if you have a big place, you know, you probably understand, you know, and that's all you do, you know. So
right.
You're a slave to the ranch, which to me, I didn't feel like I was a slave because I enjoyed it. Horses is a lifestyle, as you know.
Yes.
And it's 7 days a week, you know. We lived on the facility there. So I started bringing, you know, it was Dressage barn, and I started bringing in dressage trainers. You know, I had Charles Wilhelm come in several times. Stephen Peters, I got to know really well. Met him on the road, and he came to the barn and did clinics, and I learned a lot from him. What I liked about Stephen, you know, we all talk about natural horsemanship, whatever that means, you know.
Right.
I think Pat coined that phrase, and I think what he meant by it is that, you know, like it's been talking about for 1,000 years, you train the horse from the inside out. In other words, you work with the mind. And what I liked about him is because in the Western world we think of natural horsemanship. But what I liked about him is not only was he a fabulous rider, he'd take these Grand Prix level horses, the 4th level horses, and they're all looking good. He'd get on them and the whole world changed.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was phenomenal, these horses. But there was something really unique that I grabbed a hold of, and it really made sense to the rest of my philosophy that I was kind of learning all through that journey. He says, I make the correction and I leave him alone. You know, so I'd see if the horse was behind the leg, a little lazy to it, he'd ask and then send that horse forward. He'd make the correction and leave him alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you know, you learn from everyone. You know, I mean, I could watch you. I could watch the trainer down the street. I love watching people work horses. You know, some people make it look like it's an art and it flows, and you know, some people are awkward at it, but they have a lot of good things about it, but they just haven't got to the fluidness of it yet. You know.
Right.
And so it's always interesting watching people work horses. You know, it's you know, I go watch For a while, I was really interested in learning how to do the piaffe. So I'd go watch guys that do nothing but specialize in, the piaffe and the passage. And you're wondering, well, what's a Western guy, wanting to learn that. To me, I like to learn anything. When I was in school, I never did well because I was too busy looking out the window thinking about surfing or riding horses.
Right.
And so, my world of education has always been, horses. And I was in the automotive world and actually quite successful at it. But the horses was always my world. So I always wonder how they did that. I had, sometimes you have your version, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you think that version is pretty good and is working for you, and you go watch someone else, and you go, darn, I like that,
Right.
And it's just, usually it's just a different twist.
Yeah. Sure.
There's a lot of similarities. I mean, if you think about it, all the Western trainers and all the dressage trainers, we're all wanting to do the same thing, and if you think about the cues that we're trying to put on the horse and make him soft and light and responsive is what we're all trying to achieve. The horses, when people, I work with a couple of dressage riders now here in Aiken, and their husband started working with me. He says, Western dressage? And I said, sure, I can do cowboy dressage, Western dressage. I says, it's horsemanship, it's equitation. Mm-hmm. Either the horse moves off your leg or it doesn't. Either the horse is a happy horse or it's not. Either the horse stops or it's not. What I mean?
Right.
So the cues are all the same. There's some slight twist and versions in how we ride them in any event, but you don't ride the dressage horse down the center line, at top speed and do a slide stop for 20, 25, 30 feet or whatever the case may be.
Right.
But what I do with some of these big warm bloods, I get them so they're sucking the butt to the ground. Now, what would happen out of that, the rider, the owner, would know how to ask for that per se, even though it's not that hard. When they come to a stop, that horse would stop square and stop from the rear in the box.
Right.
And he'd almost square himself almost automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're all kind of wanting the same thing. So what we want is the horse to be light and responsive, light to her age. It reminds me of a story. I was training the horse for a good friend of mine, and she's wanting to sell it, and I like it. In fact, I think I did a video or something on her, and it was a nice mare, sorrel mare, and it's got to be very responsive, just a light touch, and very soft in the face, and giving, and you could put it in any kind of frame you want, depending on the discipline, And she says, I got some, and she was wanting to sell it, so I said, okay, I'm interested. But the price that she wanted for it, I go, I'll walk on that. So another trainer that she knew took the horse in, said they had a client that might be interested. So they ended up having that horse for almost 6 weeks. And finally, we got the horse back, and apparently whoever was wanting it, didn't want it, the first few days, actually, that it was there. But they kept the horse, and they let everybody in the world ride it. I got the horse back, and I couldn't believe what I had under me. And I had the dullest, non-responsive horse that I think I've had in a long time. I mean, we've all had some dull, non-responsive horses. But, between me and the fence post and your audience, I got two sets of spurs. I have a set of spurs that's they're bigger well, but, they're very gentle. I mean, they're about the size of a $50, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then I call what my cookie cutters were. I get them, they had a little bite to them. And this horse wouldn't respond to that, you know. And so I found out a little bit about it because a friend of mine, acquaintance I knew the trainer, and they said, well, what they do is if the horse wouldn't move off the leg, they just add more leg. I go, what do you mean more leg? They just press harder.
Yeah.
And I go, which is very common in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in any discipline, you
Right.
know, you just, you know, take that heel and that little stubby spur or whatever they got, and they just kind of and push, you know, until the leg hurts, and the horse still does or does not move. But usually, at that point, they hardly move at all. And then you get to a point you're saying, oh, you know, the owner, or the frame of mind you're in is, I hope you will, you know.
Yeah.
And I saw a horse that was a really nice horse that was spoiled. And she said to me, it says, you want to buy the horse? And I go, no. I says, well, I'll give you an offer you can't refuse. I said, no, I don't want the horse. The horse is ruined. You know, this horse got dulled down so bad, it got dead in the eye. In other words, the spirit of the horse left. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It got broken spirited. And I said, listen, I rescue horses all the time. This would be a nice little horse for mama or husband horse, you know, that, you know, they don't want to do a whole lot of stuff. They can just go down the trail.
Right.
And what I'm saying is, what a shame, you know. And this is what some of the things that I learned from, you know, Stephen Peters, you know. Make the correction. Make sure the horse moves off your leg. And then leave them alone,
Yep.
you know.
Yep. Get in and get out.
Get in and get out, you know, not this little techie, you know. So these are things that you can learn from people, little things that people have that, you know, that you are familiar with, but they got a twist or something to it that makes a lot more sense, you know. And what it does, it makes your horsemanship even better. And in the long run, it's always better for the horse. I mean, that's what it's all about. You know, you don't like in the old days, you know, it's kick and spur, you know what I mean?
Right.
and jerk, I mean, that's how I grew up, you know. And in fact, I grew up solving problems. For example, my guardian, he used to buy horses, you know, anywhere from Arizona on through New Mexico and Texas. He'd buy truck and trailer because one of the things he did, he had a standing stud service, and he showed, but the other thing he did was he bought and sold horses. Well, you buy these horses out of the auction, but, you know, time you get them picked up and they go into, you know, trailers, and time you get here, you don't know what you got. So guess what this 15-year-old teenager did? What my job was.
You were the crash dummy, huh?
Find out they bucked or ran away, or they were a nice horse, or, you know, I've had them jump over the feeders, jump over a 5-foot fence, and you know. Back then, you know, you was a kid and you giggle, and boy, what a lot of fun, you know. But we had this one horse, and it came in, and everything, you know, you get on, and all of a sudden come along, find it, stop and rear up, you know. So we tried everything. We tried the, you know, rubber hose between the ears that had come up, you know, and bop it on the head. And we tried the balloons, break it, you know, the horse is getting light feet. You take the balloon, break it overhead, make it feel like it's blood or something, you know. We tried, if we rear it up, step off and pull them over backwards, you know. And, you know, we tried all of that stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And so one time, this is what I was telling you earlier, what I do behind the barn, I do in front of people, but what I'm telling the audience and you know, here I am a, you know, 15, 16-year-old kid. So what I did is I took a 2x2 up on board. I had used the rubber hose because that's what, you know, I was told to do. Mm-hmm. And I used this 2x4. And when the horse came off the ground, I used it between the ears. Now, the thing was, that horse dropped like a sack of potatoes, and I just barely got off of that horse in time. And this was an area that made big changes in my life, even at a young age. And I thought I killed that horse.
Yeah.
But within a few minutes, the eyes opened, and kind of rolled his eyes back before and opened his eyes and shook his head and got up.
Mm-hmm.
And that really made a big impact on me. And I realized back then, I mean, shoot, I'm 73 and I was 15. Not quite 60 years ago, I was thinking of this stuff. And I knew something had to be different.
Yeah.
As I've gone through all the other stuff. Now I get ran horses in, and you can usually figure out what the owner's been doing,
right.
by what the horse is doing,
Right, for sure.
And because now you're a lot more in touch with this natural behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You know what people do to push that horse in that position. Not knowingly doing it.
Sure.
Just lack of knowledge.
Yep.
And so what I found about 30 years ago, actually a little longer, about 30 years ago, when I started doing problem horses, back then no one was doing problem horses. Now everybody in the world's doing it.
Right.
But I used to try to fix the problem where the problem was at. And what I realized, the only way I could fix the problem is start from the beginning.
Yeah.
It didn't make any difference what the horse knew or didn't know. You had to start from the beginning. Was he halter broke? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
What
Right.
was his attitude? Did he have a good work ethic? And if he didn't have a good work ethic, you had to teach him a work ethic. Something that he could do. Something that was easy. Sometimes just round penning the horse is easy.
Right.
For them to learn. Or teaching the horse to lunge. On a shorter line. And then you build from that. Can he lead? Well, no. He wants to walk all over you. So you fix that. And then, because I used to tell clients, listen, I know your horse got a 25-foot slide, and I get that he's got a good turnaround on him, but we're going to start with the groundwork. And what do you mean? I spent thousands of dollars with such and such down in Southern California. I said, I get it, I've seen you spend this horse. He's got it, but he's got a problem. We've got to find out where that is, where it started.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just, climb the ladder, and pretty soon we're riding it. But usually what happens, you stumble along, the trigger, whatever the problem is, and then you fix the trigger. You don't fix the symptom.
Right. Exactly.
And that's what I learned, because when people start, when I started doing problem horses, it was like my horse won't stand still to mount. Well, that's easy. My horse won't stand still in a mounting block. As I got more recognized in the industry, pretty soon I got horses shipped from Texas, the East Coast, of course the problems get bigger and bigger, right?
Right.
And of course before that, that's when I start realizing, the other thing I had to realize is I had to solve the problem. It's like taking your car in to get it fixed. You got this rattle in the back seat, or in the trunk, and you take it into mechanic, and you explain to him, and you drop off the car, and you come back, and the rattle is still there, and they said, well, I can't find it.
Right.
So it's the same thing with horses. So you can't, on the horse, you can't fix it until you know what the problem is. You know what I mean? You got to bring the problem up so you can fix it, type of thing.
Right.
And so what I learned to do is I set them up to fail. In other words, I looked for ways that would set that problem
Sure.
And then
So it could come up.
I could work with it. Pardon?
So that it would come up, so that you could see exactly what was taking place.
Yeah, exactly. Because remember, the car that owns the car, there's a rattle, but you get there and you don't hear no rattle, so you play around with it. So you set them up you try to look for something that would set them up for the problem to come up, so you know exactly what it is. And when you know exactly what it is, then you can fix the problem. You know. Here's an example. You know, the way that we was brought up, and a lot of people was brought up, you know, and I'm sure you heard too. You know, I've been riding for 25 years, you know. I don't need to be trained on my horse. All I want to do is go out there and ride my horse on the trail.
Yep, I just want to enjoy it. I just want to ride him.
Yeah, I just want to enjoy it, you know. Well, at the same time, the horse is coming back, and it's running back home, even though it's got a spade bit in its mouth, and the nose is between the legs, and the horse is still running off. They go, well, I don't want to train my horse. I just want to enjoy it. Well, you got a problem. Okay, you're going to have to learn to start riding this horse, and I can fix it. But if you don't learn how to do this, I'll guarantee you, by the second ride, you're going to have the same problem.
Right.
You know, and they'd come back, and, you know, by the second, third ride, you know. So the thing is, this is what I'm trying to get to. If you know the horse is spooky out there and not comfortable on the trail, and things come up the boogeyman, or the alligator with the big teeth, you know, or the branch has got, you know, big teeth, you know, would you rather solve the problem at home, you know, where you have a comfortable and a safe environment,
right?
Or are you going to try to fix the problem out there in the trail? You have no control of his nose. If he backs up, can you control him backing up? Otherwise, you're going to go over, you know, that 100-foot cliff that you was concerned about. So what you do, you work on some of these problems as they come up. So I know all horses can spook, and I'm sure you know that. Most people know that.
Sure.
So I find things that pushes their buttons, and then we work through the problem. So if I'm out there on the trail, in fact, I'm working with this dressage lady working on her horse that hadn't even started cantering. She's had the horse since she was 5 years old, and the horse is 15, and hasn't really done any cantering. The horse really doesn't know how to canter. And certainly, when the horse went on the trail, it was really not fun. So I said, well, have you worked on, you know, despooking? Have you worked on, you know, working through things? So like yesterday, day before yesterday, she lives at a place called Three Runs. And if anybody's listening that's from familiar with South Carolina, Three Runs is a big horse community, beautiful horse community. And they're all 5 or 10 acre, you know, lots. And a friend of theirs is cutting down some trees and clearing land so they can have pasture. Because here in South Carolina, we have a lot of pine trees.
Yes.
I mean, it just grows like a bad weed. You know what I mean? And it's all good. I like to look at them, you know. I'm used to looking at tall redwood trees because I lived, you know, in California.
It's a nice change of scenery.
Here we got tall pine trees, you know, and it's majestic. So anyway, I show up, and she's supposed to have her horse warmed up and, you know, riding, and I show up, and she's still lunging. I said, well, what's going on? Well, they're clearing land there. The horse doesn't like the sound of the chainsaw and the tractor and the trees falling, and I said, oh, what a beautiful training opportunity.
Yes.
And she looked at me, and I go, listen, let me explain. When I live in California, there's 2 expos there, the southern one and the northern one. And every time I was asked, if I only needed one horse, and if I could get 4 or 5 other horses out with me, I took them with me because in the warm-up ring there's carriages, wagons, you know, the clanking of the harness and the thumping of the carriage, and you know they're coming up behind you and it's scaring the bejeebies out of the horse because it's never heard that before.
Right.
You know, it's that flight instinct, kicking in. I says, what's going on now? I can't buy that situation.
Right, exactly. You can't recreate that experience anywhere else.
I can't recreate that one. You know,
Right.
I can recreate the chainsaw. You know, I can get a blower out. You know, we can get that. But the tree falling and the big tractors going on, you know, I can't do that. I says, you got a beautiful opportunity. I says, think about it. Because she goes, well, I don't think I want to ride today. And I go, well, you don't have to ride today, you know, but why don't we take advantage of this opportunity and get it adjusted to it, you know, get comfortable with it. And I said, because look at what might happen. I said, what if you was on this beautiful trail that you got available here, and you come up and someone just fires up a chainsaw, and it goes, you know, and the horse spins and runs off, you know?
Yes.
What are you going to do, you know? Has anybody even showed you how to control the nose so the horse doesn't bolt down the trail? Or why don't we go ahead and take care of that problem and get him adjusted to those kind of sights and sounds? I lived in another town called Woodside in California in the West Bay, and everybody always wanted to ride the horse into Woodside downtown. They had hitching posts. You know what I did with most of the horses I had in training? To learn to go downtown.
Yeah, for sure.
You know?
Right.
Yeah. And so anyway, she goes, oh, yeah, that makes sense, you know. So we ended up spending about a half hour. I said, listen, okay, she's fresh. She hadn't ridden her for a couple days. Let's lunge her, okay? And then what we're going to do is lunge her, and we'll get her going forward, and we'll get her, you know, to get some freshness off her. Then we'll get her to stop her feet. We'll change directions. And then when we're doing that, when she starts getting comfortable a little bit, you know, closer, I mean, where we are, we'll start working our way down towards the end of the arena where most of the noise was. And so, anyway, so without dragging this story out, what happened, I got the horse all the way down to the bottom of the arena, down the hill, and still there's trees, and we can't get to the tractor or the chainsaw, but she was happy, the horse, you know, she wasn't trying to bolt or anything. And the neck started relaxing and the whole 9 yards. And so I said, listen, we got a few minutes left. She's been working hard. She's been lunging. I said, why don't we just get on and walk her, and we can do some exercise at a walk. He says, she looks at me and says, well, do you think so? I go, look at the horse. The horse has the bottom line.
Right.
The horse had dropped his neck down and relaxed, had the soft eye. The chainsaws are going off, you know, in the distance, didn't bother her a bit. I said, well, what do you think? She says, sounds good to me. So we got on and walked around. You know, I told her, you know, only about 20 minutes because we already worked her pretty good. And then we ended up doing some trot work, and, you know, and I ended up having to go down the other end of the arena between the walk and trot work, you know. So, you know, so there's things that we can do to set horses up, you know, like I can set horses up by having a chainsaw there or a leaf blower, you know, that's like a chainsaw. You know, other things, golf carts. I've done clinics where we had golf carts running around, you know. So we can set them up for that kind of thing, but there's those things that come up that you can't, like you described, you can't set up that scenario again. I mean, that's huge, you know. It's like, oh, that's gold. That's golden.
Absolutely,
you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, that's a big perspective shift, though. You know,
Yes, it is.
if they're not in a situation where they're used to working with horses in those conditions, or they're under kind of deadlines, like you say, at the expos and things like that, the horse just has to be okay with that because the horse is your partner in the presentation and that sort of thing. Without people having that perspective, it can be a big challenge for them because, I mean, let's face it, avoidance is a natural tendency for all of us, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a problem problem comes up, even if it's not horses, we have a tendency to avoid it, go around it, run
Sure.
from it or bury our heads,
Right.
But yeah, and the other thing is, then she's had trainers and big trainers say, well, we just won't ride today. She told me that after her sister was there. She says, Charles, you know what her other trainers would say? Well, it's just not a good day to ride.
Yeah.
I go, are you kidding?
It's the best. That's the best day to ride.
Yeah, you don't have, I'm not wanting you to get on the horse and go down there and cowgirl up, we quit doing that stuff, a long time ago,
Right.
But there's ways that we can get them to get used to that kind of situation. It's like you said, when you got a horse expo, listen, you got, I've had to walk down through through stuff,
Absolutely.
And you're going, okay, Tenny, you've always brought me through before, but this is a new one, and
Right.
how you handle this one,
That's it, right? You go past the clown making the balloon animals and the popcorn stand and
and it pops,
Absolutely.
And you get the crowds around it,
Right.
if you got a seasoned horse, that's not a big deal, but
Right. That can be
you're trying
quite
to
a
introduce
situation.
the horse, Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my philosophy is it doesn't matter what discipline. Let's get that horse trained. I like to use the term broke, but I guess, that's not a correct term these days.
Right.
But in my terms, a broke horse is a pleasure to ride. He's got a work ethic. He's happy. He's a happy horse. It's just the kind of horse that everybody wants,
Right.
and it's a happy horse.
Right. Well, and that's a horse that has emotional control over himself.
Exactly.
Right? I feel like that's a big difference with a lot of these horses that we might call, quote unquote broke versus the ones that maybe we would call not quite. They have emotional stability.
Right.
And I think a lot of that is
Right.
because of those experiences, because of the opportunities to present them with those experiences, just get them out there and get them exposed.
Yeah, like I not too long ago, I did a new DVD on despooking, and one of my clients had bought a rein cow horse from a friend of mine, and it had some good training on it, and there's always something you can do with it, tighten it up, but I used it for the video because in the arena, doing cow work, going down the fence, this mare was bold, I mean, bold, it pulled right into a cow, and, it didn't bother it a bit. But take it outside the arena, they're snorting,
Yep.
They wouldn't know how to go on the trail, forever, But they don't have to, a lot of people don't do that. They just stick to the arena.
Right.
But here's something else, and I'm sure you probably come across it. You seem to be very versified. The thing is that I've had a friend of mine come up to Southern California and work with me to get his reining down and the rein cow horse down. And he said the trainer I work down there with doesn't want me to take my horse, out on the trail. Don't do that. That horse only knows arena stuff.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's really a shame because, number one, a lot of problems with horses they're just arena style. That's all they do. They turn around, they slide, they change leads, and do a bunch of circle work. How
Right.
boring is that?
Right.
At least getting on the trail. I mean, if you're going to do arena work, well, get some trot poles out there. Oh, no, that's English. Well, get a cavaletti out there, ride it over cavaletti, back it through some poles, pretend it's a trail horse. Oh, no, How about when you go on the trail, I said, there's a lot of things you can do on the trail. In fact, I got to tell you this real quick. When I bought this place, It was perfect. It was perfect, and it was in the bottom of the canyon, and you took this trail, and since then I took and had a D4, I guess what they are, and make it about 10 feet wide, and to wind up, and you could see 4 of the bridges of the Bay Area, it was a real treat.
Oh, wow.
But the problem was there wasn't a whole lot of stuff that you could do. You couldn't change directions, you couldn't circle around, because I was used to being in the West Bay in Petrola Valley and a game preserve there where they just, probably 30-foot wide strip, and you could trot, you could canter in circles. Mm-hmm. It was great,
Right.
And then I had this hill I had to go up and down. I go, oh my God, I can't do anything, Well, what I found, I had a gym here and I didn't know it. So the horses, that wanted to race back home, my normal exercise I couldn't execute real well because the limited room. But it's amazing how I can work on haunches in.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, leg yields,
Yep.
And I just keep doing it, switching hips to the right, having, half pass, after the hip starts getting better, do a half pass, even if it's 1 or 2 steps,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and then here's another thing that was a benefit. Everyone thinks, and I don't know your feelings on it, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but everyone thinks that if a horse is out in pasture and it's got heels, it's going to develop his hind end. Or if they trot up the hill, they're going to develop the hind end. Or they walk up the hill, but they want to go into a trot, and they usually let them go. And the whole idea is to build up the hind end using the hill work.
Right.
The problem is they're coming from the front end.
Right.
They're pulling themselves up the hill.
Right.
But, I read an article not too long ago. It was a barrel racer, and she says, I work on my horses, and what I do is take them up the hill. And so they showed a picture of a hill. They got a tie down on the horse,
Yeah.
and, the leverage bit and the mouth is gapped, and they're going up the hill, Well, there's no way the horse is going to, come from the hind end or engage the hind end,
Right.
He's all stressed out in the front end. The more he gags, the head goes up, the more the heavier on the front end,
Right, right.
So what I learned, another gym, was, God, I can teach his horses how to go uphill and push.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this one horse I had for sale, and the woman came out to ride it, and she loved the horse. But as we was going up the hill, she was with one of my trainers, and she stopped and asked the trainer, says, is there something wrong with this horse? It feels funny. And Sam, her name was Samantha, but we all called her Sam. And she says, no, she's just pushing from behind, and what you're feeling is, the push from behind and using the back.
Right.
And she goes, oh, I never felt that before.
It felt completely wrong because it was so foreign.
Yeah, it was just foreign,
Yeah.
It's a foreign movement,
Yes.
And then downhills, and this is great for, and you probably figured this out too, is going downhill, I get horses to slide down hills.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's capable.
Sure.
Because they get the butt under them,
Right.
Because what happens, they start going down a normal hill, and all of a sudden they got these little short steps. And I call it short stepping it.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not, flat-footing it out and free-flowing, So what I learned to do is I throw them out into a trot, and then do a half halt, bring them back, and then they do that little short step again. I ask them go into a trot, do a half halt, and then bring them back to a walk. And all of a sudden, they're flat, footing it out. In other words, they're really walking out.
Right, exactly.
Because I had to learn to do that because a lot of the people, like the Mount Diablo, there's some big, in the Livermore area, a lot of cattle ranches out there, and these guys they got a canter downhill, they got to trot downhill. You know, if you got a horse that can't even walk downhill, they ain't going to do them any good.
Right. Right.
So these are fun things, you know, that you kind of learn along the way that, you know, that you know, makes the horse a little bit better. You know, I mean, what more could be better from the horse than the horse be balanced? Because when they use the hind end, they're just going to be a nice balanced horse.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And there are so many opportunities, like you said, out on the trail. It doesn't have to be secluded in the arena to help the horse learn how to work from the haunches, how to come through from behind, how to use its back. I find a lot of times those arena situations are more meaningful to the horse anyway because they can see the purpose.
Yeah, well, that's like getting a slide down the hill, so all of a sudden your slides are better, you know?
Right.
Because they've learned to drop that hip down, you know, because they had to do that because I wouldn't let them off the hook. I mean, you're not going to get it the first couple, 2 or 3 times. But maybe 5 or 6 times they realize, oh, it's better for me just to tuck my haunches in and drop that butt down and slide and travel with the front end, you know?
Right.
You know, so there's so many things that you could do out there that in your arena work that could really make it work for you. I had one of the things that I did, for a while I was doing I own property in Missouri, and a long time ago, I don't know if you remember this. There was a thing in Missouri called Ride with the Stars.
Yes, I do remember that in the in the Adirondacks out there.
Yeah, it was kind of a guest ranch type thing, you know, and people come in and ride, and it was beautiful property. You know, Pat Pirelli was there, Clinton Anderson when he was just getting started, and Pat, and I was invited there a couple of times. It was really neat because people could just roam around and, you know, ask questions, and that's why they call it Ride with the Stars. Of course, they had to pay a lot of money, you know, to come and do that, you know, but where else could you go and sit down and have breakfast or lunch with, you know, Pat Pirelli or Clinton Anderson?
Right.
You know, or, you know, Charles Wilhelm or, you know, Patrick, you know, as far as that goes, you know, and just kind of shoot the breeze a little bit. And that was a neat deal. And that happened for 3 or 4 years, but then that's another story. But anyway, I used to do clinics out there, and what was neat about it is, you know, I had great opportunities out there, but I'd see people come out there and they, you know, I don't want to mention names, but, you know, Pirelli people, you know, they want to ride bridleless. Listen, I've been riding bridleless for the last probably 40 years, but my horse is really broke. You know what I mean? But
I'm just going to say there, Charles, I'm just going to say you didn't do a very good job of not dropping names there, or not naming names.
Oh, good.
But you know, it's okay. It's okay. When it comes to these discussions, it's just reality.
Well, there's no knock to it in a sense. It this
right,
way is
sure.
Because they get excited about the horse, and they found that they could learn to ride bridleless. You know what I mean? So they pull in, and here's this whole terrain, different kind of terrain they're used to.
Right.
And they're out there trying to ride bridleless. Well, all of a sudden they're getting in trouble because the horses not adapted that kind of environment because they never exposed them to that kind of environment.
And that comes right back to the exposure that we were talking about with the expos and with the chainsaws.
Now,
sure.
Now, what they could have done if they were fairly broke horses, as we've been talking about, what I would do if it's a new area and I don't think my horse, you know, you have to be smart, you know. You can't let your ego get out ahead of you. What I would do, I'd take my horse out in the hackamore and a bridle and go go through the trails and see what I'm up against, you know what I mean?
Right,
and
exactly.
Then if I felt comfortable, my horse felt comfortable, I could take him bridleless, but at least, you know, I'm trying to be smart about it, you know.
Right. Well, you've got to have the preparation.
It's a smart thing to do.
Yes. You got to have the preparation.
Yep. preparation, always a preparation. Yeah. And that's where I tell people, and I'm sure in a way you do too, you have to put the work in the front end. What I mean for that is the horses have to learn certain basic training, and it requires work and effort from the owner. And it requires consistency, which makes it even more difficult. And sometimes you have to be outright tenacious, and you have to be willing to make some corrections,
Yes.
And of course, that word is a big bugger, with people. Correction doesn't mean a ball bat or a tube of four like I did on a horse,
Right.
But if the horse, here's something I learned a long time ago, leading, growing up and, all the guys, the philosophy was, if you're going to be the leader, then the horse needs to follow you.
Yes.
And I agreed with that. I really did, until the third time the horse ran over me. And then I said, in philosophy, it's good, but in actuality, it sucked. And so what I did was I started teaching my horses to lead next to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just in front of their shoulders, so I could see the ears. Because what happened on these other horses is something would frighten them from the back. They don't care if you're standing in front of them. People say, well, they don't want to hurt you. They don't want to run over you. Baloney, when that flight instinct kicks in, they don't care if it's a barbed wire fence.
Right. They don't even see it in those moments.
They don't even see it. That adrenaline is going. They don't know there's traffic on the road that you're going to go cross. There's traffic back and forth. They don't know that. They don't know if it's a pavement where they hit the road and slide and slip and slide and get a road burn on their left hip because they traveled about 20 feet because they were going it fast.
Right.
They don't know that, so, and for a while I'd be at the horse expos and I hear the guys, who's leading who, some of the guys, and I said, well, I'm actually leading him. In fact, it's his job to stay up with me, So it's these kind of things, the philosophy was good, but the actuality, is not necessarily good, So these are hard lessons that you've learned and I've learned and, through the ways. And, I used to tell the people at the barn, I tell them a lot of things. You don't want to do this because such and such. And he said, well, how do you know that? Because been there, done that.
Sure, right. Experience.
It's happened to me.
Yeah.
How do you think I know,
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
Absolutely. Well, that experience is such a big thing. And, being in the industry as a professional, you and I and everybody else who's a professional, we're very fortunate in that we get to experience a lot of things, But I know you've spent many years on the road teaching clinics. I'm now full-time on the road teaching clinics. I think I work with probably about 200 different horses every month. That's more than most amateur owners. And when I say amateur, I simply mean not professionals. It's more than most amateur owners will work with in their entire lifetime with horses. So the experience that comes from that is priceless. So actually, on that road, on that train of thought, that brings me to a question. What would you say you've had as maybe your biggest life lesson in your experience from all the horses that you've worked with? If there's something that stands out as being like the biggest lesson you could say you've had, or the biggest philosophical shift, what would that be?
Well, I could tell you, this was a gray mare. You couldn't hardly get close to a saddle. It always bucked when you tried to cinch it. If you tried to bridle it, it'd just sling his head and cold cock you. There was a lot of stuff going on with this horse. And I'll try to keep it short because I know we've been going on, and there
no worries.
Maybe some of the audience may want some questions. But the big turnaround for me is this. Is that what would happen and I'd get this horse going, and we're making progress, and then we'd always kind of fall backwards. And a lot of horses do that, but not this mare. I mean, it just when you think you're on top of the world, you just got your old chest puffed up, this mare would slide backwards. And to the point that usually when a horse is brought into me, I had a few horses that were in training all the time that we showed, but most of the horses that came in for training were, I tell people most of the time, the reality is your horse is going to be here at least 3 months, period. I don't care how smart your horse is, it's going to be at least 3 months. Mm-hmm. That's for your average horse, average problem, blah, blah. Your tougher horses, 5 to 6 months. And I had this mare for 3 months, and it was doing good. You could put the bridle on. We went through all the ear thing and didn't have her. I mean, this horse is really dangerous about the ears. Really dangerous. And, I mean, we all had these ear problems on horses, and some worse than others, but this was huge. And we do fine, and then I had it, we could put a saddle on. I mean, you go up to it, you could actually cinch it up, and not explode. And then all of a sudden, and we was right at the 3 month thinking that this horse is going to go home. And then this horse blew up again. And I go, oh, that's what I'm going to do. What I'm going to tell the client.
Right.
So anyway, the client came because she was scheduled to come in. I said, listen, I kind of had my ends wedged here, and I says, that we've had the mare do really good, and she knew she was coming and being involved in it, so it's not like she never saw the horse or got involved. I said, this mare, went backwards again, and I thought we had this solid. And I says, I need this horse for another month. I need it for another month. And she said, oh, okay, whatever you think, And what I learned out of this, in that month, we went through more hurdles, some more emotional drama, because a lot of these things, one of my clients is a psychiatrist, and so it's easy to talk about stuff like this because it's just people the same thing. People got baggage, horses got baggage, And
sure.
And what I learned out of this is because she spent another month, and in that month we went through a lot more baggage, some other things that came up, there other trigger points. And what happened is that horse left, and it came back 2 years later. But it didn't come back from any of those two issues. It came back for something else. And it just started to develop, and she knew how to bring it and get it nipped in the bud. Mm. And what I learned about that is not to give up.
Yeah.
Not to give up. There's a way through. Now, on the back of that, I'll tell you, there's been a half a dozen horses that I consider non-trainable. In fact, that was a big deal for me, because I always thought all horses trainable. Mm-hmm. But I've come across some horses that are just not trainable, period. Either because lack of oxygen to the brain, like one horse that came in, she did running quarter horses, and she'd bring all of her horses to me. Okay. And get walk, trot, and cantering and bathing and all that stuff. And then she'd go to her race trainer and just had to teach it to go fast. And I thought I had the best job, but, but anyway, she brought this one horse in, and she really liked this horse. And about 2 weeks, I called her up, and I said, you need to pick this horse up. She says, well, what's wrong? And I said, this horse is not trainable. there's something going on with it, you know, because I would work with her for 4 or 5 days, take 2 days off, you know, not work it with a couple of days, and I'd come back and we'd literally almost start from zero.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, after 2 weeks, I said, I think I could go on, but I don't think I'd feel good. I feel like I'd be taking your money.
Yeah.
And I'm not a person that gives up. I'm a German. I'm like a pit bull. You know? I just don't let it go. You know, that's my bone, and I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
And so anyway, she goes, because I said, you know, it feels almost like there's maybe something at birth or a lack of blood supply to the brain or something. She says, oh yeah, it was. She goes, oh yeah, it was at Davis and the what do you call it? They had a line going to the neck for, you know, IV line.
Oh, okay.
And it collapsed, and she couldn't, you know, there was no oxygen going to the brain.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, and I said, well, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
It says, it was a kind horse, so it's not like it was a killer horse or anything.
Mm-hmm. Thank
it just
goodness.
couldn't learn anything,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So she just took it home and made it a pasture horse, you know.
Hmm.
And I had another one that a fella, he ended up buying and brought it to me. I had worked with his couple of horses with him before. He bought it. He was in financially good shape. And he bought this horse, and I said, you need to do something with this horse. It took me forever to catch this horse, and he about tore the trailer up trying to get the horse in there with a bunch of guys trying to get him in. And I worked with him for 3 months, and then I said, listen, we're making progress, but it's been real slow, a lot slower, and I'm feeling kind of like I'm taking your money. And I told him, I said, listen, there's other guys out there, you know, you wouldn't hurt my feelings if you didn't think I was up to the task and you wanted to take him someplace.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a problem with it. And I don't have a problem continue working with him, this horse. And she says, no, I know if anybody's going to get her done, you're going to get her done. So, a month later, I called him up and I said, this horse is not trainable. It is not trainable, you know. The problem is it was kind of the same thing as the other horse. We could get it further along. And it was always difficult working with his feet. It was always difficult in trying to get close to it. It always got better and better and better, but what he was going to do is just take it and turn it out. Well, this is what I said. Be honest with your audience, and I'll probably get in trouble for this. I said, we can continue on, which I don't advise. You could turn him out to pasture, make his life wonderful, you know, but the problem is you're not going to be able to keep him bedded, you know, like get him feet trimmed or anything like that. And the only other option is have him put down. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't say that lightly, because right. I've taken horses in that people tell them this horse needs to put down. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a rogue horse. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this, and how, you know, we can turn this horse around. But I've only said that once in my life. Mm-hmm. But this was a horse that he was not a happy camper. You know, I mean, if you could put him out in pasture, and then I've had people say, well, gee, well, you know, when he he didn't have to be vetted. You know, he didn't have his feet done before, and blah, 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 you know. I go, well, what if he breaks a leg?
Yeah, exactly. The what if is such a danger.
You know, I mean, what are you going to do, you know? Yeah. You're going to catch him, and you're going to try. You got to get him so you can at least get him to a point where you can, you know, put him down because the leg's broken. Or if you got all the money in the world, you're going to spend a bunch of money putting in cash, and he's not going to handle that.
Right.
You know? So this is reality sometimes, and this is, perception, a lot of people don't want to look at, but
Right.
And I don't either. Like I said, I've only said that once, and
Right.
And there's only been a few horses I said that's not trainable, and for I can tell you years. There's another thing that I've changed my mind on. I always felt that everyone can train their own horse. I no longer say that or agree with that.
Why is that?
Well, there's some people that have basically good common sense around horses and got the coordination and the common sense and the confidence to do it. As working with horses is you got to be comfortable working with equipment. I don't care if it's a lead line, reins, putting a saddle on, and some people just don't have those kind of skills.
Mm.
Some people just don't have those kind of confidence. Now, what they can do, what I suggest is that's a pretty good percentage of people, and I might get in trouble for that too. But what I suggest to people and my clients is you can continue enjoying your horse, but you're going to need a trainer to work with your horse, at least once a week. Because these are people that ridden when there were, kids, went to college, had a profession, had kids, and now they in a position they got time and money, and they're 55, 60 now.
Mm-hmm.
But they're just not comfortable around horses, and these are people that don't get to the barn often.
Right.
So the horse is sitting around a couple days, and I teach them how to lunge the horse around pen to get their freshness off of them. But here's another perception of it. I come out to the arena, and everybody's kind of lunging the horse, and they're all saddled. They're trying to get them warmed up, and I go check in on them. And they got the horse in a cute little trot, a cute little canter on the line, And I say, did you guys check to see if there's any flight buttons there going on? Did you put a little bit of pressure on it? Oh, no, because he looks so good. Well,
don't rock the boat, right?
And ask him to pick up the gait a little stronger, a little more forward, and see what happens. And, of course, then the horse kicks up. He goes charging around, on the end of the line. I go, whoops,
right.
There's that button, Just imagine if you were on that, and these are people don't get to ride much, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And need someone like me or you or a local trainer in a barn to get on him once in a while and find out what's going on with him.
Mm-hmm.
Reestablish the brakes.
Right.
I mean, I've had some great people, owners, and I teach them how to put a stop on the horse, and it's kind of like the easiest thing to do, but with some people, it just doesn't click,
Right.
And, all of a sudden they can't stop the horse. They're trotting around, they can't stop the horse, because they taught the horse to run through their hands.
Mm-hmm.
So
without knowing. It wasn't like it was
statement.
Intentional.
Pardon?
It wasn't like it was intentional. It was totally without knowing.
No, it's not intentional on their
Right.
part. They think they're doing all the right things,
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
People, it's easier for people to intellectually understand it, but to put it into communication, application
Yeah.
with a horse is something different for some people.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's that whole line, knowing and understanding are two completely different things. I joke all the time.
I mean, you do clinics all the time, and I bet you go back to the same barn, you know what I mean, with some of the same people, and they go, what happened?
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah, there's pieces that they miss, or things that
Or
they, even if we
overlap,
think they
or
understood it, they didn't quite get it.
Skipped ahead, or they ignored, or didn't correct when they should have corrected, or
Sure.
Riding horses. I mean, it doesn't. That's where I mean the hard work is in the front end, because that's when you have to learn, the application of it, and teaching that horse.
Right.
And if I can't teach someone to do that, and I can, but if I go off someplace, and I say if I'm gone for 2 weeks, I come back and I go, gee, what happened to the left lead departure?
Right.
And, well, we've been having trouble on that, and that horse knows it's lead departures.
Right.
That horse knows to take the lead from a halt, even,
Yeah.
But it's, we get busy, and we're all guilty of it. We get busy, well, let's hurry up and get her done. I mean, it has nothing even to do with horses. It could be anything that like I'm putting a sprinkler system in for, a house. I want to hurry up and get her done. This is like no fun,
Right.
But I have to remind myself, okay, we can get her done. We haven't done this a whole lot, so there's a whole thing to it, so let's make sure we do all the right things.
Yes.
Instead of trying to, do shortcuts. So we all have that in us.
Right.
And then with horses, it seems, like one gal told me one time, and a long-term, well, here's a perfect example. Yeah, it's, if I come back and they can't pick it up, the lead is because they didn't do something, or the horse did something, and they let the standard slide. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. They let the standard slide. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so instead of departing from a step, one step, you know what I mean? Because I like the horse to take a step, because that puts energy into the body. But all of a sudden the horse is doing 2 or 3 steps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sure.
Then it's doing, 4 or 5 steps.
Right.
And pretty soon you ask for, lead departure from a halt, and it goes trot, 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 trot.
Yeah, right. Halfway around the arena before you get a canter.
Halfway around the arena, and what happened? Well, with the standard, we allowed the standard to slide.
Yeah.
We didn't say, wait a minute, what's wrong here? How come it's taking 2 or 3 strides? We had this down to either coming out of the pocket or 1 step,
Right.
And so instead of working on it and recognize it when there was starting to be 1 or 2 steps, it got to be a problem where it was halfway around the arena.
Right.
So that's why sometimes you need a coach is good. Like I just worked with a lady today, and she said, I worked with a lot of dressage trainers, and like for one, this horse has learned to evade the bit. You make contact, and all of a sudden there's some baggage going with that, but it's evading of the bit, and the horse starts going sideways and stuff, and so I tell her, hey, just loosen your feet a little bit on it, and just send the horse forward. Back off your feet a little bit and send the horse forward. Sometimes that would work. And then she was still having a little bit of problem. I said, listen, why don't you, loosen up on the outside rein and do a turn on the forehand, point the horse where you want it to go, and just send it forward enthusiastically. What you're doing is correcting the horse, and it has to work for the correction. It goes right off. And she says, well, all the trainers I had, every time that happened, I'd ask them, what do I do? What do I do? And they'd go, well, I'm an instructor, not a trainer. I go, what the heck?
Yeah,
Even
sure.
the instructor should know what to do. I mean, my goodness, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's happened to probably just about everybody in some parts in their life, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the horse not wanting to move forward or make contact or something for whatever reason, you know, especially if you're in the business, you know.
Right. Right.
You know, the same person, the same big trainer says you're never going to canter that horse, and you'll never get a lead change out of that horse. And I set that horse up purposely for that horse without her knowing it, because every time I tell her, okay, we're going to do some canter work, you know what I mean, and she'd get all frustrated. So I'd have her do serpentines down through the cones. I mean, actually through the court letters.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so she got down. It was nice and smooth, and she was on the going from left to right. She was on the right lead, and all of a sudden I said, now put your right, as I'm talking, put your right leg back, and the horse switched to the lead. And she says, well, what was that? What it was? I said, well, you did your lead change that you're never going to get.
Nice.
And that made her happy, you know.
Sure, of course.
You know, you got to be some sort of a trainer. I mean, I asked her, I said, does anybody ever get on your horse? And she says, no, because they always tell me I have to learn how to do it. And I said, well, how can you learn how to do it if your horse is resisting all the time and you're working on the same problem?
Right.
And literally, this is the truth. I'm going to tell you two stories. I used to go to a ranch on the West Bay in the Bay Area, and before I moved to the East Bay, I went to another ranch. And I'd go do a lesson at the same time, and I'd watch this trainer and her student work on the same problem for a year. And I'm not fudging. And it's the same situation, you know. I mean, she was working with this trainer for 1 year, this client I have here, and the husband says, you know, I want you to think about it. That she's been with you 1 year, and you just told me you're not learning anything. And she goes, well, I really like her, but I do want to learn something. We just work on the same stuff, you know. We don't. Like the horse ain't even know how to go forward. And so my point was, does the trainer get on once in a while, help you out a little bit? Yeah, you need to learn to do it, and you will. But if you get in some rough spots and the horse gets a little backwards, you need someone's qualified to get on there and help the horse out so you can continue to learn. If that horse shuts down and starts backing up and starts getting light-footed, you don't know what to do about, solving the potential rear-up problem.
Sure, right.
You know what I mean? So it's better for someone to get on there on that horse once in a while and keep it tuned up. You know, that's kind of what I'm saying. If that all makes sense.
I think it makes perfect sense, and it's something. It reminds me. I spent a few months living with Ray Hunt, and he used to say to us all the time, you know, you're doing something you never did to get something you never had.
Exactly.
And I find that that's such a truth with a lot of the riders out there. They're trying to teach their horse to do something, but they don't even know what the feel of that is.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
Because I think there's a lack of riding made horses or riding school horses in the industry, at least in the States, from what I've seen. There's a lack of riding the horses that have the education so that they can give the education to the riders, and then those riders can carry that forward to their own personal horses.
Right, at least they get to feel what it's supposed to feel like.
Sure. If you don't know what it feels like for a horse to be in the right balance for, say, tempi changes or a canter pirouette, if you don't know what it feels like for him to be in that balance, how do you know if he's even prepared or not?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the horse that we talked about going up the hill, pushing itself from the rear.
That's exactly it, yes.
never felt it. Horse pushing from the back.
Right.
And feeling the back working. I mean, I do this client that I'm working with. I only have a couple of clients because I don't want to get that busy. I work with her 2 days a week, and I ride a horse once a week. And she had a movement the other day. She did something with a horse, and I said, now, mechanically you're doing pretty good. Your timing is getting good. Your rein position, where you're holding your hands, because she used to take her hands and kind of curl it under,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've seen that.
Yep.
I mean, it happens a lot.
Yes. That sort of puppy dog begging at the table wrist.
You're good with your hands. You're not so busy with your legs. You know what I mean? And you're getting a little quiet. You're starting to get your balance. I said, but now you got to start feeling. Because the reason I brought it up, the horse got behind the leg, and automatically she corrected the horse. She didn't ask me what was going on. She automatically tickled the horse with a dressage stick. The horse went forward and she went on. Where before she go, well, what's going on? What's going on? Now she's starting to learn to feel how that horse is getting behind the leg, and her timing is getting better. And then every time we get a good movement, I says, did you feel that? And she says, yeah. I says, use that as a Kodak moment. When you get a picture, or you see something you like, this is a picture of the feel.
Yes.
So the next time you're looking for that, you know what to look for because you felt it before. And if you don't feel it, then you know you don't have it.
Right.
It's kind of like a lot of people, kind of like, are we going on too long here or what?
No, I mean, I'm good if you're good.
No, I just, but this is all good stuff, I think,
I think so too.
If you have a feel for something, and I was going to say, sometimes people work too much in the gray area.
Yeah.
Well, I think you did. Well, I think I felt it, and I tell him, if you think you did and think you felt it, you didn't feel it.
Right.
I mean, he didn't do it. Like if you do a haunches in, you feel a movement. Is that correct? I mean,
absolutely.
It's a distinct movement.
Right. There's no gray area in there.
And I'm watching, and the hip comes in. I mean, a slight try. It might be good if you're teaching the horse for the first time. You might, say, okay, I'll take that. You know what I mean? And you're going to start asking for a little bit more. And so she can't feel that, and she'd go, well, I think I felt it. I go, no, you didn't, because you're not going to get the feel until he's double tracking, okay, until the front feet are tracking straight and the rear, okay, and that's a real significant movement. It feels almost awkward, and so if you don't feel that, then you didn't get it, And so, and to go, well, I'll never get it. Well, you're never going to get it if you keep saying you're never going to get it.
Right.
You have to start visualizing what you're doing. One of the things that I learned a long time ago in my early years, I think kind of the reason why I was able to be successful early in life is I was able to perceive myself doing what I needed to do or learn. I projected an image, and this is what I want. I see myself doing it. And sometimes it's hard, but you have to practice at it. And if what I found, if you can't see yourself doing it or imagine yourself doing it, you're physically not going to be able to do it.
Right. Whatever. What's that old line?
Train horses is a mental game.
Exactly. What's that old line? Whatever. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly right.
Yeah.
There was a time where for me to do public speaking was, oh my God, ain't gonna happen. I remember the first time my first demonstration I did up in Sacramento. This 30 years ago. And I was always worried. I was panicking. And, I'm kind of a hermit type guy, believe it or not.
Okay.
And I got there, and there was 3 people. Thank God there was only 3 people. If I had 20, 30 people, I'd probably just lose it. I remember when people, I'd have to go out in the arena for equine affair, and I still do it. I get nervous, but I've been up where the stands are full. There's 25, 3,000, 3,500 people, But I find that just like horses, one step at a time.
Yeah.
When I walk out there at equine affair and the stands are full, and I take one step. Okay, I'm going to take one step. That's all I'm going to ask. And I'm going to take another one.
Yep.
And finally I'm out there. And then they come and bring me a horse because I've worked with a problem horse, and I never go look at it, just sight unseen. And actually, now I have a requirement. Does it buck? If it bucks, I need more time. And if it's underweight, I don't want it because people don't understand.
Yeah.
Horses underweight have problems too.
Right, exactly.
And I've had to learn watching that horse come in and watch that horse, size it up, and then when my hand touches that lead rope, to feel what that lead rope says to me is what I have to do. But like you said earlier, when you're working with 200 horses a month, okay, you learn that kind of feel.
Right.
You know what I mean? When you pick up on the reins, that horse is signaling you what that horse is all about. When you put a leg on that horse, he's telling you what's all about him. Those 2 things tell you about that horse. If you put a leg on the horse and there's no motor, damn.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And you pick up the reins and it's dull. Those 2 combinations, we got trouble.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that brings me into a question here, Charles, that I'm always fascinated with as a professional in the industry, as somebody who presents at expos and teaches clinics all the time. I'm always curious to hear the thoughts of others on this, and the way that you've presented this, I think, is a fantastic segue for that. Have you gone to, say, present at an expo, and they bring you a horse, whatever the horse is, for whatever the demo happens to be, and you pick up on that lead rope, or you reach down on that rein, or you touch with your leg, and you realize that what that horse needs is completely off topic from what that demo was supposed to be? Do you have any kind of stories that you can think of from those moments?
Well, yeah, real easy. Because I explain to people there's certain exercise that I do with the horse on the ground before I go even get on the horse. I do what I call a concentrated circle. It's kind of almost sort of like a shoulder in. I'm looking for the hips to cross. Kind of think of it in terms of a wagon wheel.
Okay.
Like and you're the hub. And the horse has to travel, the left front has to travel on the rim. And the left rear has to cross over the right. So it's a little oblique, So it's not a perfect circle, you know what I mean? Or perfect bend to that circle. And what's going to happen is that I'm teaching the horse to go forward. I'm teaching that horse to yield to my hands, regardless if it's a halter or snaffle bit. And I teach our horse to go forward, It has to accept contact. And what it does, it's going to put pressure on the horse, and you're going to see where his attitude is at.
Okay.
And from there, if he shows a little attitude because I tapped him to go forward on the hip and he kicks out, well, I'm going to correct it. I'm going to correct it below the hock. And then I tell the audience, this is a horse that you want me to get on. Now, we're going to get on, but I want to see what this horse is made of. For me to do a lead change takes me several different exercise to do that lead change. Well, to me, it starts on the ground. Mm-hmm. If I got a horse that doesn't have a good attitude and a horse that doesn't take pressure, what am I going to get out of him?
Right.
If I'm in the saddle, it's a lot safer on the ground, right? And less safe in the saddle. Now, doesn't mean that you're going to make him perfect, but at least there's certain basic exercise I do on the ground. Like the other thing I do, once I do that, or I may have to lunge him. I come in, the head's up in the air, and